Imagine you're 5 months pregnant. You're 2 months away from marrying the love of your life. You just got a new home, you're working at your dream job, and you're driving home from work when everything you know and love is taken away from you, and your life is cut short, revealing deep, dark secrets. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kimbyrleigha, and if you've never been here before, nice to finally meet you. Last week we started the Fall Frightmare series, which features cases that happened during the fall months. I'm actually wearing my Fallelujah shirt today, and the rest of the videos this month will center around Thanksgiving, including this one from today. If you like dogs, you're going to want to listen to this next part because I have something exciting to share. Today's sponsor is Sundays. I've told you about them once before, and I'm just as excited this time. Those of you who are loyal subscribers know that I have 2 dogs that are like my children, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate. I've got Dexter, and yes, he's named after Dexter Morgan, the serial killer from the TV show. He's 10. And his little but older brother is this guy, our old man Kingston, the other love of my life. He's 13, but you wouldn't know it because he's so lively and cute. Unfortunately, we've had some very trying times with little Kingy. At one point, we thought he wasn't gonna make it. He has a heart condition and he's on about 13 prescription pills a day. And those medications make him unable to hold his pee-pee, so don't make fun of his cute little doggy diaper. But all this is to say that John and I try so hard to do everything we can to give both Kingston and Dexter the best quality of life possible. That includes the best diet, or foodie, as I like to call it, and that's where Sundays comes into their daily routine. Sundays is fresh, gently air-dried dog food made from a short list of 100% human-grade ingredients, ones that you can recognize and pronounce. And it's co-founded by Dr. Tori Waxman, a practicing veterinarian. It contains 90% meat, 10% vegetables, and 0% synthetic nutrients, and that's important. It took 3 years and over 17 formulations to improve the flavor, the texture, and the digestibility before they found the perfect recipe, and they continue to monitor the quality. One of my favorite things is that I know Kingston loves this food so much because he hardly has any teeth left. He lost another front one just a few weeks ago, so now his tongue hangs even more out of his mouth. But Sundays is soft. It's easy for him to chew. And the poor guy used to swallow all of his food whole, but now I can see him chewing it and enjoying it, and that makes me so happy because we have tried so many foods to try to get him excited about eating. His cardiologist told us he has to keep weight on his bones because the chonky dogs do better with his heart condition. And with Sundays, he's eating much more. I can also tell my dogs love the taste because it smells like real food, and you can see how fast they both run to gobble it down. I also love Sundays because it's easy. I won't do things that are too complicated and take way too much time. Sundays does not require refrigeration or preparation. Just pour and serve. You could feed your fur baby top quality food even on the go because there's no fridge, no prep, and no cleanup necessary. It's also convenient because guess what? I don't know if this has happened to you, but I hate to admit it. There have been times I've forgotten to buy dog food and it ran out, but not anymore with Sundays. They have an auto delivery program and every order ships right to your door. So you'll never worry about running out of dog food again. Plus you get 20% off on repeat orders. I know that making a change can be a really big decision, and that's why I'm excited that Sundays was nice enough to extend a special discount to all of you. There's a special Black Friday deal until November 30th. Get 60% off your first order of Sundays. Just click my link in the description box below. Now let's get into the case for today. Today I get to tell you about the most kind-hearted, gentle, hardworking woman that I've had the pleasure to learn about, Avis Marie Banks. She was born on August 18, 1979, to Frederick and Deborah Banks. Fred and Deborah grew up in western Mississippi. They bought a home together in Vicksburg, which is a smaller city along the east bank of the Mississippi River, with a population of about 25,000 people. Vicksburg was a great place for Fred and Deborah to start a family. It was close to their relatives, it had a cute historic vibe, a great school district, and a supportive church community. And it's only about an hour drive away from Jackson, the state capital. Living in Vicksburg, Mississippi is a unique experience. It's full of Southern charm, history, and culture. The streets are lined with towering oak trees and antebellum mansions. Vicksburg is a place where the past and the present collide and where residents take pride in their heritage. On any given day, you can find Vicksburg residents enjoying a stroll through the Vicksburg National Military Park, visiting the Old Courthouse Museum, or catching a show at the Vicksburg Theater Guild. Living in Vicksburg is also about savoring the simple things in life. It's about sitting on your porch swing on a warm summer night, listening to the crickets chirp and the river roll by. It's about enjoying a delicious home-cooked meal with family and with friends. And it's about taking the time to appreciate the beauty of the world around you. The Banks had a cute little quaint home with a porch out front, perfect for a rocking chair to sit on during those southern afternoons and evenings. Deborah and Fred both came from families who valued hard work and supported each other unconditionally. Fred was working as a street sweeper, helping the city of Vicksburg be clean and safe to live. Deborah was a full-time mom, and she was also a go-to babysitter for all their neighbors and relatives. They both worked very hard to provide for their family. Fred would provide for all their needs, and the money that Deborah brought in would be saved for special vacations or activities. They welcomed their first daughter, LaTanya Banks, in September of 1975. Then when Deborah got pregnant with Avis about 4 years later, LaTanya was so excited to have a sister. Avis was born in 1979, and she was a quiet, happy baby, just a cutie pie. And later in August 1985, Avis and LaTanya welcomed another sister, Fredrina Banks. And then the sisterhood was complete. This is a gorgeous family. And growing up, the Banks sisters did everything together. They shared clothes, they brought boys over, they laughed together, they sometimes fought, but they had fun. Avis and Fredrina were particularly close. They were best friends. They would talk about their future, how they both wanted kids around the same age, that would one day play together. And Avis was very protective of her younger sister. Avis's mother said she loved all her children, but Avis was different. She was a perfect child, and there was something about her, something that was different from the beginning. And I was wondering, do you think that parents have favorites? I've always heard that they do, but I only have one child, so I don't know if that's possible, but I've heard it is. So let me know in the comments what you think. Avis valued education, and there was a time when she brought home a report card that was all A's and 1 B, and she was crying. And Fredrina was concerned because she got B's. And she wondered, was that bad? But Avis just had high standards for herself. When she and Fredrina would play school, Avis was always the teacher, and she would love to read to her little sister and teach her everything and anything she could. She also put others before herself all the time, especially her little sister. She would let her win at games they'd play because she wanted to boost her confidence, and she always made sure Fredrina was taken care of. The same went for Avis's friends. If they were ever in need, she would be the first to step up and offer something of her own to help them out, even if it was to her detriment. Every Sunday, the family attended Locust Grove Missionary Baptist Church, where the sisters learned to put their faith first. Fred raised his daughters to be smart and conscientious. When LaTanya went to high school and started hanging out with boys, Fred totally went into protective dad mode. He made sure all the boys had only the best intentions for his daughters. They knew how he expected a man to treat them, and Fred would be there to make sure they were treating them well. As Avis got older, she had a really close relationship with her dad. Fred called her his little hero. And by the time she attended Warren Central High School, Avis was a huge bookworm and dedicated to her studies. While other kids at high school were starting to experiment with alcohol and other substances, Avis loved nothing more than staying home and hanging out with her mom, dad, and sisters while she read a book. She always had a book with her. If the family was watching TV, Avis still had a book out, reading while taking a peek at the TV every now and then. It's like she always wanted to feel productive. She also loved spending time with her extended family and taking care of younger kids, especially babies. When Avis graduated from high school in 1997, she knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life: work with kids and have kids of her own one day. It was around the same time that her older sister LaTanya moved out of the family home. This gave Avis and Fredrina a chance to become even closer, but they still spent time with LaTanya, and as a matter of fact, she would come get her younger sisters and they'd spend the weekends at her place, going shopping, out to eat, and having fun girl time. That summer in June, Fred and Deborah saved enough money to take Fredrina and Avis on a trip to Disney World. They drove 730 miles. And while Deborah started the trip driving, Fred was right there in the passenger seat documenting everything on his camcorder. Avis was shy. She didn't like being the center of attention or being on camera. So as Fred turned to face the girls in the back seat, 17-year-old Avis covered herself up, and 12-year-old Fredrina, well, she was just asleep without a care in the world as they made that 11-hour drive. And when they got to the park, again, Fred whipped out the camcorder and recorded the girls as they rode roller coasters, as they were screaming and laughing and having the time of their lives together. Avis preferred to take any photos that they had and make scrapbooks for everyone. She wanted to be able to look back on all of these special moments. She would spend hours creatively putting them together. And you can tell how much the Banks family loves one another. Fred cares so deeply about his wife and his girls. He had tears in his eyes when his eldest got married. He walked LaTanya down the aisle, and as she began to cry, he patted her gently, showing that he was there by her side. And Avis and Fredrina looked beautiful. They were just cherishing this special moment with their sister and family. Their hair was done perfectly. Their makeup was on point. Everything was perfect. So it's hard to imagine that tragedy would strike before Fred's second daughter would ever walk down the aisle. Fredrina said this was her favorite picture of her and Avis together at LaTanya's wedding. They were so happy, but she recalls that neither of them had any plans of their own to get into a serious relationship, and not yet. Avis really wanted to get her education first. She wore a beautiful gold dress since she was the maid of honor, and she looked absolutely gorgeous. When they say that someone could light up a room, I'm aware that it's very cliche. We hear them in so many true crime videos, but I'm always going to remember seeing Avis in this dress when someone says a person lit up a room, because this is what they mean. There's just a presence about her. You would know she was there, even if she wasn't trying to be noticed. The big smile, the high cheekbones, and her gentle, sweet nature, it made her stand out. After high school, Avis enrolled in Hines Community College in Vicksburg, and when she graduated in May of 1999, guess who made sure he charged the camcorder to capture the memorable moment? Yes, Fred. There he was, documenting the entire day from the minute they stepped foot out of the house until Avis walked across that stage. Fredrina remembers him being more excited about Avis graduating than she was. He was so proud of her. It reminds me so much of my own dad, and I'm sure many of you can relate. There's someone in your family that probably does this, or maybe you do it with your kids. But Avis Marie Banks received her diploma, graduating cum laude. She had told her family to please not clap for her, but they couldn't hold back. And later, Deborah told her daughter, of course, she was going to holler. She was going to let it be known that that was her daughter walking across that stage. It just goes to show you how much pride and joy Avis's family had for her. After this, she enrolled at Alcorn State University in Jackson, Mississippi, not too far from her parents, but far enough away that she could be more independent. She was majoring in child development, and over the next few years, she got to experience the exciting and life-changing chapter that college is. In Jackson, there were more people to meet, places to shop, and things to do. But still, Avis was more introverted, so she didn't go out that much. But that meant she could put more time and energy into her classes. She ended up graduating with honors in 2001. She received her bachelor's degree in childhood development, and she was the first person in her family to graduate from a university with a bachelor's degree. Her mom, dad, and sisters were so proud of her. Avis decided after graduating that she had a couple important goals for her life. First, she wanted to open her own daycare. She absolutely adored children and was really passionate about making daycare affordable for parents in need. She spent her early 20s talking to her father all the time about her plans and trying to figure out how she could make this dream a reality. She actually wanted to open 2 daycares. One would be owned as a family, and the other would be hers. Both would provide low or no-cost childcare to underprivileged children and families struggling to make ends meet. Many parents face difficulties finding an affordable daycare that actually offered a quality education to their children. She was determined to bridge this gap and make her daycare center accessible. I can tell how much Avis respected her family. She wanted to make sure if she became successful, she could also make sure she took care of her family and they had something to benefit from as well by opening up that second daycare. After all, they helped her achieve her goals as she was growing up. Avis's second goal was to have children of her own, and of course she wanted to be swept off her feet. It's true. Avis wanted a husband and a family one day, but she had set her standards high. She wanted someone who was on her level when it came to earning potential and education, someone with the same values, who was dedicated to success. She knew all that would come in time, but at the moment, she decided to get a job as an assistant director for a local daycare. This would give her the experience she needed to go out on her own in the future. And she had plans to obtain her master's degree while putting her other goals into motion. Avis had moved back to Vicksburg and continued to spend a lot of time with her younger sister while working at the daycare. She would excitedly talk about all the babies whenever she got a chance. She specialized in children under 2. One evening in early 2004, Avis, who was 24 at the time, and Fredrina were at the local gym together. something that they did on a regular basis. But this time, while they were working out, this very charismatic young man approached Avis. He had these piercing eyes, short-cut hair, well-groomed, and a nice smile. And most of all, he had this air of confidence about him. He asked Avis if she would mind speaking with him for a moment, and Fredrina, jokingly thinking, yes, we mind, because she was very protective over Avis, and she never thought anyone was good enough for her perfect sister. But Avis did decide to step away and give this gentleman a chance to speak with her. He introduced himself as Keon Pittman and said he also lived in Vicksburg. They started talking, and Avis thought, you know what? I kind of like this guy. They had a lot of things in common. Keon had also gone to Alcorn State University, but he was 29, 4 years older than Avis, so they had not run into each other in college, but they were both living comfortably in Vicksburg and loved it there. Keon also loved kids. He was actually teaching in a public school in Tallulah, Louisiana, which is about a 30-minute drive from Vicksburg, and he was really passionate about fitness and living a healthy lifestyle. All of this appealed to Avis. So she exchanged numbers with him. And then when she got back to her sister after chatting for about 10 minutes, Fredrina, of course, wanted to know how it went and what he had to say. Avis said, oh, not much. We just talked. But she could tell that Avis was excited, and it was true. After meeting Keon, she couldn't stop talking about him. The connection between them was strong. She would share stories with her family about their conversations and their interests. Eventually, Avis agreed to go on a date with Keon, and then another and another. Avis was smitten. It was clear to everyone around her that she had fallen in love. And Keon, he was a charmer. He's been described as not quite the looker, but very charismatic. However, when it came to why Keon fell for Avis, it was kind of obvious for those on the outside. She was beautiful. Of course, there's more to her, but I mean, at first glance, her skin, it's glowing. She has the cutest little nose, and she has these super expressive eyes. Just by looking at her, you could tell she also had a kind soul. She wore her hair straight a lot, but when she would let her natural curls out, she was absolutely stunning. Everyone considered Avis to be this gentle, sweet sunflower. She had this very positive, bright energy to her, and she was willing to give to other people all the time. Everyone who loved her just hoped that she would find someone who loved her just as much. When Fred and Deborah met Keon, they really liked him. He was college educated, he had a good job, he took care of himself, great manners, and valued everything Avis valued. I think this is a great time to tell you a little more about Keon's life. He'd grown up in Picayune, Mississippi, a town close to New Orleans, and he visited his family on a regular basis. Keon graduated from Alcorn State with 3 degrees, including biology, PE, and health sciences. He planned to go to medical school, but after he started looking into it, he realized this was going to be pretty rough for his mental health, so he embarked on a teaching career. He was still interested in natural medicine, and he enjoyed basketball. Fred had a high opinion of Keon. He called him a great provider and the son he never had. And Avis adored him. Fred and Deborah knew how much Keon meant to Avis, and they were so excited to see their daughter happy. It was a match made in heaven. And after a year, they were still going just as strong. Then Avis and Keon revealed they were moving in together. And for Fred and Deborah, this was exciting, but a little bittersweet. Keon had gotten a job offer in Jackson, Mississippi, which was about a 50-minute drive. This job paid a lot better than his current one. So Keon was going to be working as a 6th grade science teacher at Chastain Middle School, and he would also be the boys' basketball coach over the winter, which paid a little extra. Avis decided it would be the best for her life journey to move in with him and scope out job opportunities. Together, they bought a brand new home in Ridgeland. This is a suburb in Jackson with a population of about 20,000 people. They moved into the house at the tail end of 2005 when Avis was 26 and Keon was 30. The house was in a cute, safe neighborhood called the Blackthorn Subdivision at the far end of Lincolnshire Boulevard, sat 708 Old Square Court. It was a 3-bedroom house with a garage in a quiet neighborhood without many trees, but a nice big yard. It's located on a cul-de-sac. The housing in this area was affordable, and the neighborhood consisted of new couples who were starting to raise their families. It was also the perfect distance for Keon to drive to work. He preferred to commute, and it was only about a 25-minute drive from the middle school. To help bring in even more income, Keon got a part-time bartending job on his off time. This was at a Mexican restaurant called On the Border Mexican Cantina, which wasn't far from the middle school, only about 8 minutes. So for a few days after school each week, he would pick up shifts for some extra cash, and it can't be the tips you get when you're bartending or you're a server. That summer, Avis was excited to come to Chastain Middle School to help Keon prepare his classroom for the incoming 6th graders. He introduced one of his colleagues to Avis, and she recalls how beautiful she was, just this gorgeous lady, and remembered how Keon's eyes just lit up when he introduced them. He let it be known right away that Avis was his girlfriend, and you could tell how happy they were together. While all of this was going on and they were settling in, Avis was still holding on to her dream of owning her own daycare. Her dad had even driven up from Vicksburg a couple times to help her look at rental spaces where she could open up her own company. She was really serious about starting her own business, but life was getting busy. After the move in 2005, Avis landed a 9-to-5 job at Bright Horizons Daycare. This was a company that provided daytime childcare to Blue Cross Blue Shield employees. She worked Monday through Friday and had the weekends free. She specifically worked with babies and children under 2. According to Avis's boss, she was a wonderful employee. She was quiet, always on time. She got along with everyone. She valued teamwork, and she was an absolute natural when it came to taking care of kids. Avis's boss was not the only one who had glowing reviews. In March of 2006, Avis and Keon got new neighbors. When Johnny Coleman and his kids moved in next door to them, Avis and Keon stopped by to introduce themselves. I wish more people did that, but I feel like it's such a thing of the past now. Johnny said they were super welcoming and friendly, and they seemed like, quote, a very happy couple, end quote. He said Avis was very soft-spoken and introverted and was pleasant to be around. She spent a lot of time in her house, and her favorite moments were spent having quality time at home with Keon and her family. And in August 2006, Avis had some big news. She found out that she was pregnant, and they weren't planning on this happening right away, but they both agreed they definitely wanted kids and were excited to be expecting. Fredrina remembers the day she found out that she was going to be an aunt. Avis called one morning and their mother answered the phone, but Fredrina was close by and you could hear her mother excitedly asking questions, and she wanted to know what was going on. So Deborah just handed the phone to her youngest daughter, and Avis asked her, "Are you sitting down?" And that's when she told her sister she was going to be an auntie. This was going to be Fredrina's first niece or nephew, so she was very excited. When Fred and Deborah found out, they were overjoyed. But the truth is, they weren't really that happy about the fact that their daughter was having a child out of wedlock. So they did put a little pressure on Avis and Keon to get married. This was fine with Avis. She was 27 now and down to get married at any time. Keon was really excited. He told all of his coworkers the big news, and one of them asked him if wedding bells were coming soon. That's when he kind of shyly said, "Oh, I know where you're going with that question. Yes, we're going to get married soon." And Keon did end up proposing to Avis that fall, and they set their wedding date for a few months later in the new year, mid-January 2007. That way, maybe she wouldn't be showing as much, you'd only be about 6 months pregnant, and everything was falling into place. But life was continuing to get busier for the couple, and they were experiencing the stress of balancing all the parts of their lives. In August, Keon started the new school year at Chastain Middle School. Every day he left for work at 7 a.m., got out of school at 3:30, ran some errands, went back to school, and then coached the basketball team. He would finally get home around 7:30 or 8 o'clock. And on the evenings and weekends when he wasn't coaching, he was working his part-time bartending job. So on those nights, he would come home even later. But he was putting in the work to pay for their wedding and, of course, their new baby coming soon. Avis was super busy herself. Not only was she excitedly planning a wedding and space for their new baby in their home, but she was still working full-time, doing housework, spending time with her parents, and planning to open her own daycare, all while being pregnant, going to all her appointments, experiencing morning sickness, cravings, you name it. By November of 2006, her baby bump was just starting to show through her clothes, but she was exhausted. Excited to be a mom, but exhausted. She did find out the baby's gender. It was a boy, and she and Keon already decided on a name, Keelan. Avis and Keon told their families about the new baby's name over Thanksgiving break. When they traveled to Picayune to visit Keon's family as well as Houston to spend time at LaTanya's for Thanksgiving dinner with Avis's family. But at both celebrations, Keon was acting a bit strange. While Avis was hanging out with his mom, Keon was gone for hours from the home. And at LaTanya's house, Keon was on his phone all the time. He seemed really absent from the conversations, and would go outside to take phone calls, which, if you ask me, is a little sketchy. Why can't you just have the phone call in front of everyone else? At dinner, Fred noticed that Avis was feeling some type of way about Keon's behavior. He said, quote, "I remember Avis was just sitting across from him and he walked by on his phone. And Avis kind of looked at him, kind of gave him a little look," end quote. It's hard to know what she was thinking during Thanksgiving break, but obviously Keon had a lot going on. And when the family asked him what was up, he said he was having some family issues and speaking to his mother. Avis's family totally understood. But Keon was always a little bit sketchy. Like, you couldn't quite tell if something else was going on or who he was talking to. He had a lot of friends. But Fred and Deborah knew that Avis was head over heels for him. She trusted him. But they started to wonder if Keon returned those feelings completely. He was charismatic, but he was definitely flaky. But since they trusted Avis, they trusted her judgment. The last time Fred and Deborah saw Keon and Avis together was the Sunday after Thanksgiving. They drove up to Ridgeland to spend time with their daughter and help her decorate her house for Christmas. Fred helped Keon put those hanging icicle kind of lights from the roof. They lit up all these light up candy canes right in front of the porch area. And they had a Christmas tree made of a swirling strand of lights in the front yard. Avis invited her family over for Christmas, and they were looking forward to going to church and spending the rest of the holidays together. But I want to fast forward to Wednesday, November 29th. When Avis was getting off work, she got a call from Keon at 5:12 p.m. He told her he was on his way to basketball practice and he'd see her later. She left the Bright Horizons location on Lakeland Drive at 5:15 p.m., feeling tired after a long day. At 5:36, she gave Keon another call. She asked about his plans for dinner, and he said he'd take care of everything when he got home from basketball practice. Satisfied with his answer, Avis drove the rest of the way to their house. She stopped in front of it to pick up the mail from the mailbox. This was her usual routine. She would drive up, get out of her car, check the mail, then get back in her car and drive up to their garage. Then she would open the garage door with the remote in her car, drive inside, and then make sure the garage door was completely shut before she got out. Then she would proceed to the door inside the garage that led into their home. She was pretty street smart, and she always made sure to be safe, acknowledging her surroundings in case something happened. Well, something did happen. Something horrible and devastating. Keon's whereabouts over the course of the night are all over the place, and I'll get into that later. But one thing is certain. When Keon got home around 8:30 that evening, he opened the garage door and found his pregnant fiancée collapsed next to her Honda Accord. Avis was lying right next to the driver's door in a large pool of blood that was trailing down the slope of the garage floor towards the driveway. She was still wearing her work scrubs along with a light jacket, and her keys were clenched in her hand, showing that she had been attacked as soon as she got out of her car. Avis's purse and some of the pieces of mail were scattered all around her body. Keon ran to Avis. He tried waking her up. He was hugging her. He was shaking her. He was crying, and he even kissed her on the lips. But sadly, she was gone. She had already passed away. Keon noticed that her pants had been pulled down, and his heart just broke. In an absolute flood of emotion, Keon raced into the house and all around it, trying to see if the culprit was still on the scene. There was no one to be found. The house was a disaster. There were papers everywhere, drawers opened. It was completely ransacked. It looked like Avis and Keon were the victims of a burglary gone wrong. Keon raced back to his fiance's body, and this is where things get weird. Instead of calling 911 from his cell phone, which he had on him, he frantically ran to the neighbor's house and started banging on their door. The couple who lived next door had no idea what was happening. All they see is this man running and knocking and yelling at the top of his lungs, trying to get into their house. The woman picked up her phone and she dialed 911. On this recording, the neighbor begins to make her noise complaint, saying that there's this man outside hollering and banging on her door. And she told the operator that he was running from door to door doing the same thing in the neighborhood. But while on the line, she's looking out the window and she realizes she recognized him. She tells the operator she thinks it's her neighbor. So she sent her husband out there to go check. That's when she hears her husband yell, "Call 911." She said, "Why? What is going on?" And her husband yelled, "Somebody killed his wife." In a panic, this woman relays to the operator that their neighbor said someone killed his wife. Keon went back to where Avis was laying, and he remained there until the police showed up. He also called Deborah for a second time that night. The first time had been when Keon was driving home from basketball practice. He had called Deborah around 8:31 to say Avis wasn't picking up her phone, and he was really worried about her. He wanted to know if Deborah had heard from her in the past few hours. Deborah thought that was very out of character for Keon because he had never called to say he was concerned about Avis before. Maybe she was watching her favorite TV show, or she fell asleep. So when Deborah got another call from Keon around 8:45, she picked it up wondering what was he going to say now. On the other end of the line, he was screaming, and his words were jumbled. She said, "Keon, what is going on? Where's Avis?" And he just said that her and Fred needed to get over to Ridgeland now. Something happened to Avis. I can only imagine what was going on in Fred and Deborah's minds when they got that call. They were preparing for bed on a Wednesday night in the middle of a long work week, and they get this call from their future son-in-law saying that it's urgent and to come over now. They fluctuated between panic and confusion, and thoughts were whirling around in their minds. Was Avis hurt? Did she fall? Was the baby okay? Deborah suspected it must be a miscarriage. She knew it was imperative that she be there for her daughter to support her through one of the most heartbreaking things that can ever happen to a woman, if that was the case. But it turned out to be much worse. Fredrina heard her mother screaming from the other room as she was in the middle of giving her baby son a bath. She was alarmed, so she asked, "What is going on?" And Deborah simply handed Fredrina the phone. And she said, "It's Keon. He's saying something's wrong with Avis." Fredrina gets on the phone, and again, he repeats what he told Deborah, that they needed to get over there now. And Fredrina's like, "For what? What's going on?" But Keon just hung up. Deborah, Fred, Fredrina, and her baby jumped into the car, and they drove the 55 miles east to the Jackson suburbs. When they pulled up to Old Square Court, Avis's family was anticipating her house lit up by Christmas lights on the dark, quiet street, and it was lit up with Christmas lights, but also with police lights as well. Fredrina just remembers seeing a bunch of cops and an ambulance and yellow police tape around Avis's home. There were a bunch of neighbors along the edge of the property who were trying to figure out what was going on. Deborah walked slowly up to the house. It was the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. As soon as Fred saw that crime scene tape, he knew in his gut that something really bad happened to Avis and that nothing would ever be the same. As they joined the crowd around the house, they run into Keon, who was just screaming and crying and not making any sense. And Fredrina was like, "Keon, you got to get up and you got to tell us what's going on." But he was unable to speak. Finally, it was the coroner that came up to this family. And he said in these words, quote, "Your daughter is deceased. She died a horrible death." End quote. Wow. How absolutely devastating are those words? There's no good way to deliver that kind of news. And it is the truth. Fred and Deborah lost their beloved middle daughter and the grandson that they were so excited to meet. Avis was 5 months pregnant. Her unborn baby was a victim to this vicious murder as well. And from their vantage point, Avis's mom and dad could see their future son-in-law sitting in a cop car, and they were confused as to why. They figured he was just going to be questioned so they could figure out what happened to Avis, because of course, he wouldn't be involved, right? He couldn't be. He was like a son to the Banks family. But we know that most women are sadly killed by someone close to them, and who's closer to Avis than Keon? All they could do was wait. So let's go back to the crime scene. Investigators had arrived at 8:46 p.m. and found Keon hovering over Avis's body with blood all over his hands, pants, and shirt. Head Lieutenant Neal and Detective Frank Dillard of the Ridgeland Police Department immediately took steps to secure this crime scene and figure out what happened. They told Keon he needed to back up, but Keon didn't want to leave Avis's side. It took a lot of convincing to get him to wait in that patrol car. Then the paramedics arrived, confirming that Avis had passed away, as well as her unborn son. Avis had been shot, and one of the bullets had missed, hitting the bottom left corner of the garage door. There was a hole right through it. But that wasn't all. A knife or a sharp-bladed object had been used to stab her multiple times, and she was slashed across her throat. There were no signs of a struggle. It appeared that everything happened so fast that Avis was in shock when she passed away. It didn't seem like she saw this coming at all. And what kind of monster could have done this? We know Avis. She spent her time working hard, being with her family, and giving back to others. So who in the world would want to hurt such a lovely person? Lieutenant Neal looked over the crime scene, and first, they started looking in the garage for evidence. They found that bullet hole in the garage door, but when they tried to look for shell casings, it turns out there were none. So either all of these shells had been meticulously and carefully picked up from the floor, or a revolver had been used, because they don't leave empty cartridges behind. They remain in the cylinder. So next they noticed that the door between the garage and the house was wide open. They did a walkthrough of the home and realized someone had slammed the back door open with such force that the doorknob dented the wall. It left an impression. Lieutenant Neal wondered if this was a sign of anger or if the perpetrator was just in a hurry to get into that house. He also found Avis's blood on the wall between the garage and the house, as well as a light switch near the back door. They found several really important pieces of evidence. To get into the house, the perpetrator had walked past the garage door to the back door, which had a glass panel on it. They attempted to force it open by kicking it. Dirty shoe prints were left behind on this glass in the process. They were able to measure the prints. They took pictures of them. They lifted them from the glass. And after analyzing them, they determined that they were a men's size 8 shoe. The forensic team also noticed they had a very distinctive pattern of tread. So they made sure to document the prints so carefully so they could analyze them and try to match them if any other shoes were found in this investigation. This is where it gets really interesting. The house was a mess. This made sense for a burglary and robbery, but there was nothing missing from the house. Expensive jewelry, electronics, and other easily pawnable items were all left behind. Detective Neal said that this house did not look right to veteran officers. Someone had unplugged all the electronic devices and they'd stacked them up, but they didn't steal a single one. Then they'd gone to the main bedroom, opened every other drawer in the dresser, and rummaged through them. He said they even went into the bathroom and did the same thing to the bathroom cabinets, every other drawer. Lieutenant Neal had never seen a robber go through a bathroom like that because people don't usually keep their valuable items in the bathroom. So what was this perpetrator looking for? How close were they to Avis that they could have known where to look in her bathroom for something? That's when they start to question whether the scene was staged. Lieutenant Neal had taken notice of Avis's scrub pants, that they had been pulled down, and it was easy to jump to conclusions, but there were no signs of a struggle. Since the robbery seemed staged, he wondered if this could be staged as well. In Neal's 20 years as a detective, he had seen a lot of crimes of passion and failed attempts at covering up evidence, and this seemed like one of those cases where the perpetrator was trying to throw off the investigators. He was also shocked and horrified by Avis's multiple wounds with 2 different styles of weapon. It appeared to be overkill, and that she sustained what he considered defacing injuries. He decided that this murder was driven by rage or revenge. Someone had hurt Avis with a motive and wanted to make sure she was dead, and possibly her unborn baby too. During the initial search, police were not able to find any fingerprints or DNA evidence in that house that wasn't Keon's or Avis's. They even brought in a police dog, but no luck. The dog was like, nope, can't smell any strangers here. Naturally, the police wondered if Keon was the one who had done this. The same guy who was sitting in their car waiting to be taken back to the station for questioning. He knew the exact time Avis got off work. He knew Avis better than anyone, and he, more than anyone, had a motive. I mean, if you look at the statistics for the majority of women who are murdered, most of the time it's their boyfriend, husband, or ex. Domestic altercations are a huge issue. Not to mention, Keon was the one who found Avis, but he hadn't even called 911. So what was going on with this guy? Keon was taken back to the station for questioning with Detective Dillard, and it was clear that he was going to put him through the ringer. Keon was experiencing all kinds of emotions, including grief, anger, and denial, and he just kept getting on his phone, calling people, texting nonstop. The detective noticed that Keon appeared remarkably calm and relaxed, which struck him as peculiar. Given the gravity of this situation that he had just experienced, how could he look so unbothered? Keon had made a lot of phone calls while sitting in the police car and the waiting room. And before the interview started, Detective Dillard overheard Keon say to someone over the phone, quote, "I don't like this at all. These mother effers think that I had something to do with this end quote. So Detective Dillard wondered what the issue was.
I don't like this at all. These motherfuckers think I had something to do with the I believe. When I came home, I knew something was up.
Keon explained that he felt as though he was being targeted, that he was being looked at as a suspect from the get-go. But the detective explained this was actually a routine interview. Everyone was going to go through an interview like this if they were close to Avis. He was the one who found her, and he was very close to her. It's obvious that he would be questioned, and if he cared to find out what happened to his fiancée, then he would cooperate with them the best he can. Detective Dillard then started to ask him some easier questions, about his line of work, his outfit, and Keon actually laughed a few times and tried to make a couple jokes. It could have been a trauma response. I know that I sometimes laugh when I receive unexpected news, but it could also be a sign that Keon was emotionally detached from what happened to Avis, or didn't really know how to handle it. Or maybe he just didn't trust detectives. He maybe thought that they were going to imprison him right on the spot without even having evidence that he did anything wrong. I can't even begin to imagine all the thoughts that were running through his head during this interview, but when Detective Dillard heard Keon laughing, he had to actually remind him that he was at the police station because his bride-to-be, an unborn son, had been murdered. Detective Dillard noticed that Keon was self-absorbed and turned questions around to talk more about himself every time. He complained about how he was being treated and victimized himself in order to distract from the topics at hand. At one point, Keon said that Detective Dillard wouldn't let him use the bathroom. Dillard replied to Keon that he was allowed to go use the bathroom and had used the bathroom. Then Keon said he didn't interpret it that way. Again, he was grieving. He's not going to be in the most rational mindset, but it's not really an excuse for being unhelpful, especially when the police were trying to figure out what happened to his fiancée. There were a few things that bothered Detective Dillard. The first was why Keon didn't call 911 from his cell phone right away. He not only went into the house, but he hadn't called when he came back outside. When questioned about this, Keon's excuse was that he didn't want to pay for roaming charges. I don't know how many of you remember when cell phone plans only included certain areas, and when you made calls outside those boundaries, you'd incur extra charges. But this was an emergency. It was 911. It was his fiancée. So that seemed very odd. Like he'd have to actually stop and think about these roaming charges at a time like that. But he insisted he didn't know where the 911 call would be routed. And he didn't think it would go through, and he didn't want to waste time. Now Dillard wants him to recount what he did that day. He said he spent his day teaching at Chastain Middle School as usual. After getting off, he ran some errands, including picking up some groceries to bring home that evening after basketball practice, which began at 5:30 and lasted until about 7:30 p.m. or 7:45 p.m. Now, he didn't want the groceries to spoil, so he asked a fellow coach that lived right near the school if he could put them in their fridge and retrieve them quickly once practice was over. And that's what he did. He dropped them off at around 5 p.m., left around 5:10 p.m., and even called Avis on the way over to the school gym. And then they talked once again just after practice started when Avis called to ask what was for dinner. He told her he'd be bringing food home. He finished up around 7:45 or so, left the school, scooped up his groceries, and went home. While he drove, he called Avis, but he did not get an answer, and he became concerned. That's when he called her mother, Deborah, and asked her if she'd heard from her, and she hadn't. And we know what happened next. The detective had more questions, but Keon refused to talk as soon as he started to read his Miranda warnings. Keon said he was going to need to hire an attorney, especially if they were going to tell him he was innocent, but treat him like he was a suspect. He complained that in the United States, it seems like you are guilty until proven innocent. But he was ignoring the fact that his behavior made it look like he was guilty. Anyway, he did hire an attorney, Antoine Patrick, who shed more light on how Keon was treated during his interview. Allegedly, police had told Keon multiple times to, quote, sit down and shut up, end quote. And Detective Dillard questioned Keon until 4:30 or 5 in the morning. That's a long time. This might have been a little bit of an exaggeration, but if you ask me, both parties in this interview just clashed. Was Keon being difficult because the police were keeping him there so long, or were the police keeping him there so long because he was being difficult? Either way, Keon stopped talking and sought the advice of counsel, which I would recommend everyone does if they're ever being questioned in regard to any crime, especially a murder. Now, before letting him go, investigators photographed Keon's clothing. He was wearing a blue and white pinstripe dress shirt. It was a button-down polo, a gold chain, khaki pants, and a white undershirt. There was a bloodstain on the top left under his shoulder area and more on his left sleeve. Another spot was on the bottom left, closer to his pants, and there was a bunch of blood streaked in between his leg areas of his khakis, as well as on various other places of those pants, like the cuffs by the ankles. There didn't appear to be any on his shoes, though. They were lace-ups with brown leather and blue cloth. They did take swabs of Keon's hands, which also had a noticeable amount of blood on them. You can see it under his fingernails and on his hands, and they wanted to make sure there wasn't any gunpowder residue on them. So they did a GSR test. And this test actually came back positive for gunpowder, but there was only a single particle on each hand. It's highly possible that residue rubbed off from Avis's clothing when Keon held her in his arms. That could also explain why her blood was on his clothing. Keon left the interview outraged at the way he was treated. Police had taken his cell phone, his clothing, and Avis's car in as evidence, and they got a search warrant for Keon's car, leaving him in a very vulnerable position. He didn't trust Detective Neal and Dillard at all. No matter how many times they reassured him that he was not a suspect, he didn't believe them. And while Keon was hard for the police to stomach, there was not enough evidence to charge him with a crime. They did find a pair of shoes in the trunk of his car, but they didn't match the tread from the print left on the back door. However, they were a men's size 8, the exact same size of the prints left behind by the perpetrator. So this definitely keeps him on their radar. It didn't matter whether they liked him or not. This wasn't enough evidence to hold him, and maybe he was just grieving in his own way. And that's why he needed to leave town, because that's what he did. It was a detective's job to find out who killed them, be it Keon or someone else. Keon ended up leaving Jackson for a while to be with his family. After November 29th, he got a substitute teacher to cover his classes, and he quit his bartending job at the Mexican restaurant, which could be seen as running away to get the prying eyes off of him, but it didn't matter. Right now, investigators had to put all the evidence together. They spent the next few days going door to door in the neighborhood and putting together a timeline for Avis's death. They believed from her phone records and her GPS information that Avis called and talked to Keon at 5:12 p.m. and again at 5:36 p.m. that evening when she was driving home from work. And she arrived home between 5:50 and 6 p.m. They think she was killed shortly thereafter. They talked to Johnny Coleman, Avis's next-door neighbor. Now, he hadn't been around to call the police that night. He had actually driven his children home from school at 4:30 that day, and they had spent the whole evening indoors trying to ignore the construction workers. The workers stopped a little before 6 p.m. That would be around the time that Avis was ambushed coming home from work. When Johnny left for his night shift at 7:45, Avis's garage door was shut, with the Christmas lights on outside her home. Everything looked normal. And I wondered, were the Christmas lights usually turned on at this time? Did Avis turn them on when she got home? Doesn't seem like she would have had time. Or did the perpetrator turn them on? I'm genuinely wondering where the lights were plugged in, and I wasn't able to find any information on that. Maybe they were on a timer. I know that I've had ones like that before, but I just got this haunting image in my mind of Avis's murderer turning on the lights to make everything look normal. And that literally gives me chills. It's so creepy, especially since we know that they were inside of the house. The police ran into a bunch of dead ends with the neighbors since Avis's garage door was shut. So they started digging into Keon's life. First, they looked at his cell phone records. At 6 p.m., his cell phone pinged to a tower near Chastain Middle School. The rest of the evening, he moved around a lot, but none of the messages filtered through the Lake Harbor Drive cell tower, and that's the tower closest to his and Avis's house. Keon was still a suspect, but investigators needed to find a witness who could confirm that Keon was in the area that night or even owned a gun. When detectives went to the Mexican restaurant where Keon worked, they started asking the other bartenders, the servers, and the regulars questions about him. And they cracked open a huge bombshell. According to Keon's coworkers, he was quite the ladies' man. Why did I see this part coming? They said that he had regulars coming in all the time to see him. Now, I mean, that's not too uncommon for bartenders, but they go one step further and said they witnessed Keon flirting with women constantly. Still not that out of the norm for a bartender, but it didn't end there. He had been seen kissing not just one woman, but several different women who his coworkers referred to as his girlfriends. Yeah. So they would come in and visit him, and they would leave together at the end of his shifts. It was almost as though he had this side job to meet girls on the side. It was clear that Keon was living a double life. He was a player, and if Avis had any idea, she never told any of her friends or family about it. But it's unlikely that she knew the whole story. When we love someone, it's really hard to imagine that they wouldn't be loyal until it's uncovered somehow. We want to trust them. And Avis didn't go visit Keon at the bar very often, so he could meet up with whoever he pleased at his workplace. Police were not surprised to hear about Keon's affairs because they overheard him calling someone babe over the phone in that initial interview room. That's right. When he was complaining about the detectives, he referred to the person on the other line as babe. So detectives made a note of it, and now they know why. But Keon cheating on Avis didn't mean that he was her murderer. Maybe he did love her, and maybe he just couldn't handle the commitment. But if he didn't love her, well, that would be a great motive. Avis was pregnant with his child. Did Keon just not want to be tied down? Was he the Chris Watts type of guy? A guy who thought he knew what he wanted but met someone else and changed his mind. So he took matters into his own hands and ended Avis's life so that he wouldn't have to have a kid around? It's a sickening thought. But it happens. This is not nearly enough evidence to charge Keon with anything, so police decided to follow a lead. One of Keon's restaurant coworkers had mentioned the name of one of the women he was seeing. Her name was Carla Hughes. She frequented the bar on the nights that Keon worked, and she also happened to be one of his coworkers at the school. The teachers would go out and hang out together, go eat at nearby restaurants, but Carla would come in on her own to see Keon outside of work-related activities. Now, no one blatantly said they knew Keon and Carla were more than friends. They just mentioned her coming in regularly over the past few months. Detective Dillard went to Chastain Middle School on December 1st, 2 days after Avis was killed. He was there to interview Keon's colleagues, especially Carla Hughes. And when he asked to speak with her, she immediately burst into tears. She was hysterically crying, and this looked suspicious. Detective Dillard asked her if she knew Avis, and that's why she was upset. And Carla said she knew of her, but did not know her personally. She was crying because she and Keon worked together. They both coached together, and she was sad about what he was going through, something so horrible. Dillard couldn't really conduct a proper interview because she was so emotional. So he scheduled a private interview with her later that evening after she was done with work. Then he went around the school asking questions about Keon and Carla. You already know who Keon is, but this is what they learned about Carla. The 25-year-old language arts teacher was from Greenville, Mississippi. She was born on June 12, 1981, and when she was only 6 weeks old, she was adopted by her Uncle Carl and her Aunt Linda Hughes, her biological mother's cousin. Carla went to T.L. Weston High School and regularly attended Mercy Seat Baptist Church. Her parents were school teachers and close friends with the pastor, the mayor, and other big names in town. And let me tell you, Carla was involved in everything: tennis, soccer, basketball, band, dancing, cheerleading, Key Club, the Mayor's Youth Council, the Mississippi State Senate, and the list goes on. She excelled in horseback riding and beauty pageants. She finished 6th in the world in a horse showing competition at the age of 14. She won many awards and was an honors student. She was also voted most likely to succeed in life by her high school graduating class. Carla was a popular cheerleader growing up. She brought enthusiasm and spirit to the sidelines of every game. She was also a talented musician and played in the school band. Carla's involvement in different activities didn't stop there. She was happily engaged in her community, always seeking opportunities to make a positive impact. Her bubbly personality and her natural charisma made her everyone's favorite. She was well-liked by her classmates and teachers alike. Carla earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Southern Mississippi in early 2000. Next, she earned her Master's of Education degree from Belhaven College in Jackson, Mississippi, and then she began taking graduate coursework in education at Delta State University while she was working at an elementary school, but then she decided to take the job as a 7th grade language arts teacher at Chastain Middle School in August, right before school started. Her parents were worried because everything happened so suddenly. She actually had to move nearby until she settled in, and this wasn't the best part of town. She actually had a break-in less than 3 months after moving in. This was in early October. Someone actually tried to get into her back door, and she reported it to the Jackson Police Department. She was looking to relocate soon, but she loved her job, which came with a higher salary. She was the cheerleading coach, and she enjoyed making new friends with other teachers, including Keon. Everyone the detectives talked to said they loved Carla. She was really popular with the students as well as her coworkers. They said that she had a close relationship with fellow teachers, including Coach Keon Pittman. They had a habit of having long conversations outside of the office, calling each other, and hanging out after class. When asked if they thought Keon and Carla were more than friends, no one could be 100% certain, but they wouldn't be surprised if they were. Later that evening, Carla and Detective Dillard had an 80-minute interview at the police station. And during Carla's interview, she presented herself as personable, friendly, and helpful. The detectives asked her to recount what she did the day that Avis was murdered. She told them she saw Keon while they were both dismissing their students at the end of the day, and that's when he mentioned he was going grocery shopping, and he asked her if he could put his food in her fridge while he went to basketball practice. She said yes, that would be fine. And that's what he did. Keon had gotten groceries after school from Rainbow Whole Foods and dropped the groceries off at 4:40 p.m. in Carla's fridge. Carla's apartment was between Rainbow Whole Foods and Chastain Middle School, so her place was a natural, quick place to stop between errands and going to the basketball practice. She said that Keon dropped off the groceries and he left for practice. Carla went to the gym to work out. Keon then called her while he was at practice to figure out when he could come back and pick up the groceries, and she promised that she was on her way home to take a shower, but he could pick them up at any time. Keon got off basketball practice at 7:30 p.m. and stopped by her apartment for the groceries around 7:50. Carla said they chatted for a few minutes, and then she started to get ready for bed and call her mother, and that is when he left to drive home. They asked her the next time she heard from him, although they already knew the answer from Keon's phone records. She told detectives Keon called her around 8:45 p.m. She was speaking with her mom, and she put her on hold to answer his call. She thought he was just going to say, "Hey, I made it home," and say goodnight. But instead, he screamed. He was like, "Oh my God, oh my God." He was saying it over and over again and told her that she needed to come to his house as fast as possible, that someone hurt Avis. And then Carla said that Keon described the scene to her, that it looked like their house had been robbed, that there was stuff everywhere, and Avis was lying unresponsive next to her car in a pool of blood under her head, and there was mail scattered all around her body. Carla was overwhelmed. She was confused. She got back on the phone with her mom and told her everything. Carla asked her mom if she should go help Keon, and her mom said, "No, don't go over there. That's ridiculous. It's a crime scene." So Carla chose not to drive out and support Keon, even though Keon called her a couple more times over the course of that evening while he was sitting in the police car and while he was at the station. Detectives think this is really suspicious, especially because they know he didn't call 911. Instead, he's calling another woman. So they asked Carla if Keon usually called her after he got off work, and she said, yeah, they do keep in touch. It makes sense. They're both coaches. There's basketball and cheerleading schedules and school events, so they may have to call and ask each other questions. But still, detectives want to understand the nature of these calls. But Carla insists they're innocent. As a matter of fact, Keon had even talked to Carla with Avis right there. For instance, when he and Carla and their colleagues were out after work, Keon would call Avis and name off everyone who was there, including Carla. She said that Avis knew she was one of Keon's friends and coworkers. So Dillard asked Carla if she had a boyfriend. And she said no, that her last romantic partner and her had broken up. But now he wants to know if her and Keon had a romantic relationship. And she said, no, they did not.
He's not a boyfriend. He's just a friend. Nothing sexual with him. Nothing.
But as he presses her even more, she finally admits they had sex, but that there was no full-blown romance, not at all, because it wasn't serious. She called the relationship a, quote, special friendship, end quote, and that sometimes they engaged in public displays of affection, but they never really did more than kiss. I guess except for sex, right? I'm assuming she's talking about what they did in public. Karla told police that she respected that Keon was engaged to be married, and she didn't want more than a casual fling. She never told him to break up with Avis. She expected Avis as well, even though she didn't know her personally. Karla said she even stored her motorcycle at Keon's house for a while, and Avis didn't have a problem with her doing that. Wow, so this is a lot. And Detective Dillard heard her story and found it plausible since it matched up with everything Keon already told them. But the casual way that Karla was talking about everything really did seem weird. During the interview, she got a phone call from someone, and Detective Dillard noticed right away she answered it calmly and jumped right back into the interview. At first, Karla had been breaking down crying about Avis's death, and now she's talking about it completely collected. So Detective Dillard wasn't sure what to think. And let's be real. Karla working out at the time of Avis's death wasn't the best alibi, unless there were cameras at the gym or somebody had seen her. Everyone is a suspect. They can't simply toss out the idea that Keon and Karla being each other's alibis meant that maybe both of them had been involved. So he asked Karla if she owned a gun, and she said no, she did not. Then he asked her if she had access to a gun, and she said no, but that her dad had a lot of guns because he was a hunter. Finally, Dillard asked Karla what she thought about the fact that Avis and her child had died, and Karla's response was that it was, quote, very, very unfortunate, end quote. Detectives spent the next couple of days after Karla's interview trying to process all of the evidence and information they received, and then they began interviewing other people in the community. Any tips were welcome. They tried desperately to get in touch with Keon because they really wanted to interview him now after Karla explained what their relationship was really like, but he had mysteriously vanished off the face of the earth, which was pretty strange. With Karla and Keon acting so suspiciously, the detectives had to wonder if they really were in on this together. Was one of them the murderer and the other an accomplice? And if so, which one? Or was it someone else entirely? That's what they needed to find out. Their biggest piece of evidence from the crime scene were the .38 caliber bullets that were recovered from Avis's body and the shoe prints. They'd already searched through Keon's things at his house, and they were unable to locate any shoes that had the same tread as the ones that were left on that back door. But remember that they were the right size. So could he have gotten rid of them somehow? Well, before they can even begin to look into that, the police get a tip. But since I haven't even told you about the autopsy, I'm going to quickly tell you what was ascertained from that exam and then proceed to let you know about the first big break in this case. As I stated, 4 .38 caliber bullets were recovered from Avis's body. 3 of the 4 gunshot wounds were fatal. 1 bullet hit her thigh, the other one in her stomach and out her glutes, another in the left side of her chest, and the last to the back of the head, execution style. All of the bullets had been fired from very close proximity, suggesting that Avis was ambushed as soon as she got out of her car. A knife or another sharp-bladed object had been used to stab her several times in the head, as well as slash her across her throat. But these wounds seem to have been done post-mortem, so after she was already dead, which is so brutal and so cruel. It was confirmed that there was no signs of forced sexual activity, so it did seem like that part was staged. They deduced that the murder weapon was a 5-shot revolver, and sadly, it was confirmed that Avis was in her second trimester of her pregnancy, and since her unborn child died as a result of Avis being killed, his death was ruled a homicide like hers. The theory was that the killer was waiting inside the house for Avis to pull up. They could hear the garage door open. They could hear her pulling her car in and then closing the garage door behind her. As soon as she got out of her vehicle, the killer ambushed her, most likely shooting her in the leg first to stop her in her tracks, and then they proceeded to fire the other 4 shots. 1 missed and went through the garage door. The 3 others made contact and killed Avis. The rest was overkill and very personal. All of it seemed personal, and it was. Avis was lying on that cold concrete ground, dying all alone for 3 hours until Keon alerted the police that she was dead. It's so heartbreaking to think about what she must have thought in those final moments. Some say that head wounds like hers would have killed a person right away, but we will never know. We could only hope that she did not suffer too long. I told you that a tip came in. Well, an attorney in the Jackson area called in on December 5th to say that he had information about a gun. He actually had it in his possession, and it matched the description of the one that could have been used in Avis's case. He also had a witness who could tie the gun back to the person who they believe committed the crime. Investigators contacted this witness and brought him in for an interview. His name is Patrick Nash. He's Carla Hughes's first cousin. You're hearing her name again. Their mothers are sisters. He and his dad, Carla's uncle James, lived in Jackson. He said that on November 26th, 3 days before the shooting, Carla came to Patrick's house and asked him to borrow some weapons to protect herself. She lived in a really rough neighborhood, and her apartment had already been broken into several times since August. Her dad actually had to drive up from Greenville and fix the lock on her door at one point. So Carla told Patrick that she did not feel safe and it would make her feel better if she was able to defend herself if something like that happened again. At first, Patrick suggested that she get a can of mace, but Carla said that would not be enough and asked him if he had any extra guns that she could hold on to until she moved out of there. For starters, Patrick gave her a 4-inch folding hunting knife and then went to look for a gun that he could loan his cousin. He gave Carla a Rossi .38 caliber revolver that held 5 bullets. He showed her how to use the gun, he loaded it with 5 bullets, and he sent her on her way. And he didn't think much of it at the time, but on the evening of December 1st, right after Carla got out of the interview with Detective Dillard, she went back to Patrick's house and she returned the revolver. It was freshly cleaned and the bullets were no longer inside. When Patrick asked Carla where they were, she said she had used them for target practice. Remember that exactly 5 bullets were fired at the crime scene. And he never saw that knife again. Patrick already knew Avis had died because Carla told him on the night of Avis's murder. She called him and let him know. So all the details lined up, and Patrick and James honestly didn't know what to do. They talked about it for a couple of days. They both loved Carla and found her to be a really compassionate and peaceful person. They just didn't think she was capable of this violence, capable of a murder. Did she even know that the bullets had been used? Had she cleaned the gun, or had someone else used it and not told her? They didn't know, but what they knew is that they needed to come forward. Together, Patrick and James went to a lawyer with the gun, and the lawyer went to the police. The police were so grateful that they'd come forward. Patrick and James were stand-up citizens, and they did the right thing by giving the police this information. This is a sign for anyone out there who has ever seen anything sketchy. Tips really matter. They can change the course of an entire investigation. If you see something, say something, please, even if it's family, because remember, someone else's loved one has been taken away, and you'd want someone to do the same for you. Investigators sent the revolver to a ballistics company, and they conducted some test fires. They determined that, yes, the bullets used in the revolver were a positive match for the bullets used to kill Avis. Since Carla was in possession of that gun on November 29th, it was confirmed that she was somehow involved in this crime and was actively working to cover it up. She lied to detectives not once but twice. First, she told them that she was just friends with Keon, and then she said that she didn't have access to a weapon. That's not a good look when you're a suspect. On the morning of December 6th, Avis and her unborn son Keelan's funeral was held at Locust Grove Church. It was a day filled with grief and sorrow. The funeral occurred on the same day that Avis was supposed to receive her master's degree. It was a bitter irony that she couldn't be there to celebrate her academic achievement. Friends, family, and colleagues gathered to pay their respects and to say goodbye to a woman that had touched so many lives. As everyone was gathering around reminiscing about Avis's life and her impact, Keon walked in. You could feel the tension. Avis's family had just recently found out about his affair with Carla Hughes, and emotions were running high, but the police were on site in case anything were to happen. Fred and Deborah were outraged that Keon would even show his face at that funeral. Fred thought for sure that he was responsible for Avis's death. They remembered back to Thanksgiving weekend when Keon was spending all that time pacing around and talking on the phone. They wondered if this had anything to do with Avis's death. LaTanya disagreed with her dad. There was something about her sister's death that seemed so brutal and so calculated that she thought there was something more to it. Either way, they felt that Keon had some role in Avis's murder. And the family was furious that he had the audacity to show up and not even cry. They saw him pretending to be upset, and they didn't want him there. Fred and Deborah described what he was doing as just hollering. There weren't any tears coming out of his eyes. It was just noise. And the devil's advocate would say that everyone grieves in their own way, but the Banks family was not having it. LaTanya told Keon she would beat his ass. Her husband had to literally hold her back from attacking him. And that's when a scuffle began, and a few men started to turn on Keon. The police had to intervene and escort him to his car with some sort of cloth or coat shielding his face from view, and he never saw the Banks family again after that. That would be tough. On one hand, it's your loved one's fiance and their unborn child. But on the other hand, he's a suspect. So I don't know what I would do, but I think I would lean more towards not wanting him there. Even if he merely cheated on my family member while they were pregnant with his child, that would be enough for me probably not to want to see him again because of his disrespect. Avis definitely didn't deserve that level of disrespect and drama at her funeral. And I wish I didn't have to be sitting here right now telling you the story of her murder, as well as all of the deeper secrets that I'm about to uncover. After speaking with Patrick Nash, Carla Hughes had been called in for another interview, and this time she brought a lawyer. The man she brought in was Johnny Walls, a well-known state senator who knew the Hughes family very well from back in Greenville. He'd known Carla Ann Hughes since she was just a little girl. Johnny met Carla when she was in high school, and he held her in very high regard. Remember that Carla was very accomplished. I told you about all of her honors when she was growing up, so he was shocked that she would be involved in a crime of this magnitude. There were many questions she was willing to answer, but at one point, when the detective stepped out of the room, she and her lawyer friend kept talking. They should know better, since most of us know that all police stations are recording audio and sometimes video in their interview rooms. And there they sat, whispering to one another. And her lawyer said something to the effect of, they're waiting for you to give them information about Keon and his involvement in all this. If you point the finger at him, it'll take the pressure off of you. But she just responded that she couldn't do that because she doesn't know what happened. Well, the Ridgeland PD charged Carla with accessory to murder after the fact, hoping that she would come clean and tell them what she knew about the man that it seemed like she was covering for. But she remained silent. Considering Carla had always been so well-liked and successful in her life, her arrest came as a huge shock to her community. Everyone thought she was well-grounded and just a genuinely nice person. She was never even agitated or raised her voice. She was stubborn sometimes, but many of us can be. But she was always the type to take the high road. Carla lived by the philosophy her mother taught her, which was, quote, God says to turn the other cheek. End quote. So all this was so hard for people to wrap their minds around. Carla being charged with accessory to murder? Well, it's possible. In all the videos I've done, I've realized anyone is capable of spiraling down into the depths of depravity. It's what I talk about in my Dark Livity podcast. Even those we least expect to, model students, best friends, people without any mental health concerns or criminal histories. Keon didn't have a criminal history either, but at least one of them had stooped to this level of excessive, monstrous violence, and investigators needed to figure out who. Once police served Carla the papers charging her with accessory to murder, the detectives once again left the room, and she and her lawyer discussed the situation among themselves. Her lawyer told Carla that she shouldn't be too concerned. The police were certain Keon was the culprit. They just needed an accusation, and Carla would be the best person to blame Keon. He told her that the reason she was being charged was because Patrick had reported under oath that Carla returned the gun to him empty and that she had been crying when she gave it back to him. Carla said she wasn't crying, and she didn't know who killed Avis because she wasn't there to witness it. And she stood firm. She would not accuse Keon of any crime. Johnny wanted to know why Carla was trying to protect Keon. To the police and everyone else trying to understand this crime, it didn't make sense. Why wouldn't she save herself? There was only speculation. They thought, was Carla in love with Keon, and that's why she refused to point the finger? And if Carla truly didn't know what happened, and it was someone else who had killed Avis, was she just being honest and trying to stay true to herself? She certainly wasn't going to plead guilty. Not when police had so little evidence against her. Together, Carla and Johnny agreed that she would plead not guilty and remain silent. And because she did remain silent, it reinforced her charge. She was taken to the Madison County Detention Center and resigned from her job at Chastain Middle School. In the following days, news outlets reporting on the crime kept asking Lieutenant Neal why Carla was charged, but he didn't reveal any information to the press. Instead, he continued to reach out to Keon. His car was now missing, and he had never gone back to school or told anyone if he might come back. The kids at this school were so confused about what happened to their favorite language arts and science teacher. It felt like a big hole in their community, and the flood of newspaper articles kept saying the same thing, that the police couldn't comment on Avis's case until Keon was interviewed. Deborah and Fred were relieved that someone was being charged in the crime. Deborah told the Clarion Ledger on December 7th that she had actually met Carla before. Yeah, it's true. She'd been to one of Avis's housewarming parties. Carla had visited as Keon's friend. There were no other reports that Avis and Carla knew one another. Also, since Avis and Keon had been living in their house long before Carla started teaching at Chastain, the timeline was a little bit off. But this showed me just how much Avis's case was affecting her family. Deborah was horrified and upset to learn that she might have met the person who killed her daughter, especially knowing that this crime could have been prevented if Carla would have just run off with Keon and left Avis alone. Anything would have been better than this. On Friday, December 8th, Lieutenant Neal continued his investigation, now directing his efforts to figure out if Carla committed this crime. He applied for a search warrant on the 6th, and you know those things take a few days to go through. But finally, it was ready. Detective Dillard actually recorded a walkthrough, a video of Carla's apartment. They were hoping to find a few different things: the missing bullet shells, a missing folding knife, blood-stained clothing, shoes that matched the shoe print on the door, gloves, or any written communication between Carla and Keon that would reveal more about their relationship. The search found 3 things. First, they found a photograph of Keon propped up on Carla's nightstand among a bunch of other photos that she had of him. This further established the affair between the two of them. Second, a handwritten poem addressed to Carla and signed with the initials KP. And we know that's Keon Pittman's initials. Third, as Carla's closet was being searched, they found hundreds of shoes still in their boxes. You can see them right here. But one pair stood out, a size 10 women's black tread-safe tennis shoe. These were non-slip shoes that someone would usually wear to work if they were like waiting tables. Police sent the shoes to the Mississippi Crime Laboratory, and the tread pattern, you could even look at it. It was identical to the shoe print found on Avis's back door. And here's what's so interesting. A size 10 in women's is a size 8 in men's. So these shoes were the exact same size that they were looking for all along. They were quickly sent to lab for DNA testing. The initial test had no DNA detected on the shoes. However, the detectives decided to send these shoes to a second lab for a more in-depth analysis, and there, a technician carefully examined them under a microscope, and they were astonished because they found several microscopic bloodstains on that shoe. The technician conducted DNA testing on those dried bloodstains, and the results were conclusive. The blood found on the shoe was an exact match for Avis Banks. This evidence indicated that Carla came into contact with Avis at some time during her murder, and the charges against Carla were upgraded to 2 counts of capital murder. In Mississippi, killing a pregnant woman is the equivalent to killing 2 people, and the consequences of capital murder is either life in prison or the death penalty. Carla's prison time started immediately after she was charged. She was held without bond at the detention center, and police finally revealed to the newspapers that she was charged because she was associated with both the murder weapon and the shoe print. That's pretty damning. Fred and Deborah did not attend Carla's initial hearing, but they said that they were glad someone was being brought to justice. The matter of Keon's innocence was yet to be determined. Police still needed to track this man down. As far as we know, Keon was never officially fired from Chastain, but since he never promised to return, it counted as a resignation. On December 13th, he did drive to the police department to talk to Lieutenant Neal. But Keon turned his car around as soon as he saw reporters. Antoine, his lawyer, said that Keon would return to work in January once the media stopped intensely covering this case. He made an offer to the police that Keon would answer all their questions in written form like an email, but that wasn't going to cut it. There was so much nonverbal body language that you can analyze through an in-person interview. It was crucial that police figure out how Keon was involved, and they needed to interview him in person. They finally got their chance in January. He was a witness at Carla's preliminary trial, which was held January 2nd of 2007. The courtroom was packed, and Keon answered several questions about his affair with Carla. And interestingly enough, it didn't quite match up with Carla's interpretation of their relationship. This is going to get good, so please don't leave now. Here's where it gets very interesting and equally disturbing. And I hope you're ready for this. Keon was introduced to Carla when she began working at the middle school in August of 2006. And he said there was instant chemistry between the two of them. It began with innocent flirting, but it quickly turned into them passing notes to one another during school hours and having their students actually facilitating this. Keon would write one and then have a student drop it off to Carla and vice versa. Very inappropriate. Carla was so similar to Avis. They were both intelligent, accomplished, beautiful women, but Carla was her opposite in some ways that Keon was very attracted to. She was social. She enjoyed partying, whereas Avis liked to stay at home and was more family-oriented. Carla was his fun girl, and she quickly began making it obvious that she was interested in Keon regardless of the fact that he had a fiancée at home that was pregnant with his baby, and that's just pathetic. After only 3 weeks of knowing each other, she tells Keon that she rides a motorcycle, which of course intrigued him, so she offered to go on a ride with him. They just needed to stop by her apartment, close to school, so she could change real fast. But instead of seeking the privacy of her bathroom or bedroom alone, no, Carla just takes her clothes off right in front of Keon. He got the message loud and clear. And soon, Carla was coming over to Keon's bar and drinking all night, which eventually led them to going back to her place and having sex. And this was only a few days after she got naked right in front of him. That was the other thing. Keon said that Carla wouldn't say no to anything when it came to the bedroom. They began sleeping together 3 or 4 times a week, and Keon described it as a sexual adventure. And they weren't hiding their affair when Carla came into his bar. Keon would pay her special attention, even played with her feet at her table in front of other customers and coworkers. They were very brazen. All of this happening while Avis is pregnant. She's working all day. She's waiting for him to get back home from what she thinks is him working hard to provide for their growing family. It disgusts me. And I hope this case is a big eye-opener, but many men don't watch these videos. So it's most likely only going to cause women to have more fear and anxiety, because I know that's what it did to me, sadly. But this isn't me just pointing fingers at men. Ladies, take note of how dangerous an affair can be. On Labor Day weekend in September, just a few weeks after they started sleeping together, Keon boldly takes a trip to Memphis with Carla. I don't know how he pulled that off, but while there, he confided in her that he's not always completely satisfied with his relationship with Avis. To what extent? I don't know. But he said he realized after all this, he may have led Carla on when he was just in his feelings at the time. He didn't love Carla. It was merely sexual, according to him. But I think writing someone a poem is more emotional than just physical. Would you agree or not? While Carla became more and more possessive over Keon as time went on, she began to imagine what it would be like if she was his wife and she was living in a nice house having his baby, not Avis. Carla doesn't hold back. She begins pressuring Keon to break things off with Avis, but he refuses. even when Carla tells him that she's in love with him. Now, we're only hearing his side of things. We don't know what he actually told Carla, but she must have thought the pregnancy was a big reason that Keon wouldn't leave. That may be why Carla announced to Keon that she was pregnant with his baby. Maybe that would change his mind. Shocked when he heard this, Keon had no idea how he was going to deal with 2 pregnant women in his life at the same time. Carla was getting more and more bold as well. She wanted Keon to get caught. There was one weekend that he and Avis took a trip to attend his cousin's wedding in Detroit, and when they got back to the airport in Mississippi, Carla was there, waiting in her car, watching them. Keon pretended that he did not see her, and thankfully, Avis was not aware of her presence. But the next time he's with Carla, he confronts her about this, and Carla lies that her aunt was borrowing her car. But finally she comes clean and tells him she just wanted to see who he was bringing on his trip to Detroit. Carla was well aware that she wasn't the only person Keon was cheating with. Later in October, she said that her pregnancy test was not valid. It was a false positive. Her doctor said it had something to do with her birth control method that she was using, whatever that means. But I think it's clear that Carla wasn't being honest to begin with. And Keon was so happy to receive this news that she is not having his baby. And Carla becomes irate. How dare he be happy that she's not pregnant? So she threatened to drive over to Avis and tell her about their affair. She actually got in her car, started driving over there. He's following behind her, calling her on the phone and begging her not to. He finally said if she pulled up to his house, he would call the police. Carla finally backed down. Despite all this, though, Keon still thought the sex was worth all of this drama because he continued seeing Carla. He said it was like he was addicted, but insisted he wasn't making love to her. Well, maybe not in his mind, but it was clear that Carla wanted more. By the time Thanksgiving comes around, Keon and Avis made their way to LaTanya's out in Houston, and remember his phone kept ringing? Well, it was another woman. It was Carla begging him to come spend the holidays with her. Oh, and by the way, Keon had met Carla's friends and family. And when he did, she would introduce him as her future husband. Yeah. He didn't see that as a red flag. Carla kept interrupting dinner, and Keon kept answering instead of ignoring her calls. Finally, Avis jokingly asked him, "Who's that? Your girlfriend that keeps calling?" And he made light of it. He just said it was a family issue. Well, you'd think. All of this is quite a hassle for Keon, so much so that he would just stop seeing Carla. Plus, if it was just sex, then why was he doing so much for her, risking so much for her? The weekend after Thanksgiving, Avis and Keon make a trip out to his mom's house to spend some time there. Well, guess who drives out there with the friend and gets a hotel nearby? Yeah, Carla. And she's begging Keon to come see her. He finally gives in to her demands and meets her at a bar on Saturday night. I don't know how he was able to excuse his absence to Avis and his mother, but after a few drinks, Keon tells Carla he's gotta get back to his mom. This is supposed to be family time. And she's livid. She doesn't like being second. So an argument starts, and it continues into the next day over texts and calls. And at this point, Carla tells Keon that something has to change. She tells him that Avis isn't the right person for him and that they should just run away together. Well, he agreed on one thing. Something did need to change. So he decided to go distant and stop returning her messages and her calls because he'd had enough. Then Keon described the events on the evening that Avis was murdered, and we already know all of that. Remember, he's on the stand saying all this at Carla's preliminary hearing. But when Carla's defense attorney, Johnny Walls, begins questioning Keon, he's not as forward with his information. He refused to answer any questions. How frustrating is that? He took the stand, swore to say the whole truth and nothing but the truth, but remained silent. But I guess he has the right to protect himself. Because of Keon's behavior, everyone in the room started to suspect he was hiding something, and Johnny was understandably frustrated. He ended his questioning by asking Keon, "Have you had a chance to cry yet?" And everyone in the courtroom gasped. A couple people laughed. I mean, Keon was not the easiest guy to like based on his string of affairs, but nobody expected Johnny to just burn him like that in front of the whole courtroom. But the judge ruled he would appoint a grand jury for Karla's trial. There was a ton of evidence to uncover. Some was still being processed, and the community was increasingly invested in the outcome of this case. There was a lot of outward support for Karla, and Deborah said it was really hard to stomach. There was all this rhetoric going around about how great Karla was when her daughter was the victim. All she was doing was hearing all about what a great person Karla was, how many beauty pageants she won, how everyone thought this had to be a mistake. There was a mistake. Keon getting involved with this other woman. In February 2007, the state decided to pursue the death penalty against Karla due to the particularly cruel and heinous nature of Avis's murder. When a reporter for the Clarion Ledger interviewed Deborah Banks, Avis's mom, she was asked for her thoughts, and Deborah responded with, well, she brought this on herself. There were 3 whole years in between Karla's preliminary hearing and the actual trial. It usually takes a year or 2 maybe, but this was a long time. And a lot happened in preparation for this trial. In 2007, Johnny filed 11 motions in order to relieve Karla of her potential sentence. He motioned to replace a few jury members. Then he demanded the jury never hear the words death penalty. He wanted the verdict and sentencing to be done in 2 separate rulings. He also said that Karla should be relieved completely of her charges because she was discriminated against due to her race. This was not unheard of. Discrimination does happen, but the way Johnny went about this was in bad taste. The victim in this case was also a Black female, so his argument that Karla should be released because she was already a victim as a descendant of slaves and had to endure that lifelong sentence, so to speak, that last motion didn't go through. But Johnny was definitely putting in the work and living up to his title as defense attorney, but also grasping at straws. In 2007, Keon also stopped talking to his lawyer, and the police just gave up trying to get in touch with him. In December of that year, Keon had straight up left Mississippi for Detroit, and he got married to another woman there. I'll say what you're probably thinking. That was fast, but grief is cyclical, and maybe a new wife was just the support system he needed. Side note, I did notice that he changed his name, and he and his new wife, who also is a teacher and has a degree in elementary education, but is also a master herbalist, opened up a botanical institute. It's an online school where they teach the proper implementation of botanical knowledge and herbal wisdom, according to their company's website. That's still in operation today. What a total life change. When the police find out that Keon is married, they get a copy of his marriage certificate and they give it to Karla for Valentine's Day in 2008. That's juvenile on so many levels, but it was worth a shot to see if she would talk. Karla did not take the bait. She said she wasn't surprised he was married and continued to remain silent on whether Keon was an accessory. A couple other reasons this trial took so long was the Ridgeland area changed district attorneys, and then Lieutenant Neal needed surgery after he fell off a 15-foot ladder. But on Monday, October 5th of 2009, the long wait was over. Finally, the Banks family could get the answers they deserved. The Madison County courtroom in Jackson was filled with people, and Karla pled not guilty to 2 counts of capital murder and burglary with the intent to assault. Prosecutors Michael Guest and John Empfinger said that Karla wanted to be married to Keon, so she killed Avis out of jealousy. The defense attorney, Johnny Walls, said Keon had framed Karla, and he was the only person responsible for Avis and his unborn child passing away. Keon was the key witness on Tuesday. He spoke for 4 hours. And I'm going to try to summarize everything for you, but trust me, there's a lot of gaps that he filled in. I'm going to make it quick. First, he said he was innocent. He called himself a fool for sleeping with Karla. He explained that he and Karla texted all the time, and though Avis never officially met her, they had seen each other at the airport and in passing. Avis knew they were friends, but not that they were hooking up. She trusted Keon and never would have thought he was cheating. Keon felt guilty that Avis went to work and came home and devoted her life to their family, and that he put her in risk by running around with this other woman. He felt partially responsible for what happened. At least he could own up to his behaviors and recognize where he messed up. Then he described his affair with Karla. We've already heard most of it, but wow. Just wow. Karla and Keon had the audacity to have sex in Avis's house 3 different times when she was at work. So Karla had been in that house enough times to know the full layout, and that was important. They spent so much time together for a while that Keon had a key to Karla's apartment, though he said he gave it back in mid-November. This would come in when it came to Karla's defense. Keon said he was totally stringing Karla along. There was no emotional connection, but he did everything to make her feel special, and she wanted to spend time with him constantly. She kept his love notes in her bedroom and was in complete denial about him not wanting more. Keon told some wild stories, but keep in mind, this is Keon trying to save himself from being implicated and sent to jail. He told the court that Karla was basically stalking him, even though he was the one who agreed to meet her all of those times, which was wild to me. On Sunday, November 26th, Keon said he was talking to Karla on the phone while he was spending time with Fred and Deborah. And it was during that disagreement that Karla said from this point on, some things are going to change. That was so ominous. And it was also the night that Karla retrieved that gun from Patrick. Keon said after his and Karla's disagreement, they didn't talk much for the rest of that week. He also said the last time he hooked up with her was mid-November. But what were they doing in Karla's hotel room the weekend before Avis's death? And why did they spend so much time together on that Wednesday night before he drove back home and found her dead? He was at her apartment getting groceries, I'm doing air quotes, getting groceries for almost an hour. So something does not add up. But Keon broke down the timeline of events. He confirmed Karla's statement that he dropped off the groceries at her house, left around 5:15, went to basketball practice, and spent the entire time texting another woman, Bridget. Bridget was a mom of one of the kids he was coaching. She was at the gym the entire time that he was there, texting him from right across the room. Of course, Bridget didn't want anyone to know about their flirtationship, as I'm calling it, with Keon, the coach. She was married, and the flirty text messages kept up this excitement of the affair. But later, Bridget testified that Keon was at practice the whole time, and she was also one of the women he was having sex with, even a few months after Avis died. And to me, it feels a bit heartless. But it also means that Keon had an alibi between 5:50 and 6 p.m. when the police believed that Avis was killed. Other parents came forward and testified to these facts as well. He was at practice when it started. When Keon picked up his groceries from Karla's place, he said she was quiet, which was not normal. She was usually very energetic and talkative. He did admit that he stayed for about 40 minutes, and then he called Avis on his way home. But when she didn't respond, he freaked out. And once again, something doesn't add up. Keon saying that he had a feeling something was wrong and saying that he knew this before he even opened the garage didn't really add up to me. He said that he actually left his car door open. You can see it right here. The car is still running, but the garage door was shut at that time when he pulled in. So how did he know something wasn't right before actually opening it? Maybe I'm a little confused with his statements. But what we did know, when Keon found Avis, he panicked, and he said that's why he called Karla and another woman, who I'm assuming was Bridget, hoping that they would come over and support him through this trying time. He was in shock, and he said he wasn't having rational reactions under the circumstances. When Keon was asked why he didn't immediately call 911, again, he said to the jury that he just didn't think the call would go through. He had purchased his phone outside the Ridgeland area, so he thought the phone would connect to the wrong police department. I don't know if this is just an excuse or if he really didn't know how 911 worked or how phones work. What do you think? The defense asked Keon about the tread-safe tennis shoes that Karla owned, and it turns out Karla had actually gifted these shoes to Keon. They were non-slip shoes that were really good for bartending. However, when he wore them into the Mexican restaurant, Keon said that they told him he wasn't allowed to wear those specific shoes, so he gave them back to her in mid-November. Why does everything happen in mid-November? It's like he gave the key back to her in mid-November, the shoes back to her in mid-November. It's weird. The defense was convinced that Keon had used the key that Karla gave him to let himself into her apartment, borrow those shoes, and wear them to the scene of the crime, and then put them back. Because why would Karla, if she did this, put bloody shoes back in her own closet? But according to the police, Keon was not wearing those tread-safe shoes that evening. He would not have had any time to do all that. When he was taken from the scene right to the police station, he was wearing lace-up Cole Haans. Keon spent his entire testimony crying but without tears. Just like at Avis's funeral, Deborah told Dateline that she thought he just rubbed his eyes until they were red just before he took the stand, so it looked like he was more upset. And let's be real, everyone could see through Keon's BS at this point. But was he really a murderer or involved? It was up to the jury to decide. Later that week during the trial, the prosecution and the defense brought in cell phone experts. Keon and Carla's cell phone devices had been all over the place that evening, and it seemed like the only way to find out who killed Avis was to find out where they were between 5:50 and 6 p.m. A cell phone engineer testified for the defense that someone could start a call in one area, drive to the next, and commit a murder while the phone call was still going on. And during that time, it would only register to the original cell tower where the call was started. This could create an alibi, and the perpetrator could get away with the crime. But you would need to be on the phone the entire time. And from what it looks like, most of the calls Keon and Carla made that evening were very short check-ins. They weren't on the phone for a long period. Another guy, an AT&T engineer, confirmed that Avis's last call to Keon pinged at the Lake Harbor Drive cell phone tower, a tower with a 2.5-mile radius that included the Blackthorn subdivision where Avis and Keon lived. So at 5:36, when Avis called Keon about their dinner plans, she was even closer to home. The AT&T engineer also said that Keon's calls came from Carla's place, then Chastain, then the grocery store, but he was never anywhere near his own home. That is until 8:41 and 8:56, when he made 2 calls that pinged off the Lake Harbor Drive tower. And that did show that he got home around 8:30. Keon called Carla at 5:37 p.m., right after he called Avis about dinner. Who knows what they talked about? Was it about him picking up his groceries? Or was it something else? But when Keon made that call to her, and she ended that call, her phone showed that she was somewhere within 2 miles of Avis's home. Then at 6:04, Carla makes another outgoing call, and once again, her phone pings at the Lake Harbor Drive tower. At 6:07, she called someone else, and now she was out of the range and on her way back home. One of these post-6 p.m. calls were made to Keon while he was at practice. So what did they need to talk about? Did Carla tell him what she had done? Or was she confirming it was finished? Both sides have their theories. Carla did have one friend that lived near the Lake Harbor Drive cell tower, but when questioned, that friend said that Carla had not come to visit on the 29th. Why was she near that particular tower then? Her gym was close to her home. It was now clear that Carla was the one that killed Avis in cold blood. And Keon might have been an accessory based on the numerous calls over the course of that day, but there was no way to figure out what they said to each other over the phone. Carla remained silent. But one huge bombshell that was revealed that I could not believe was Carla had a son. He was 2 years old at the time she moved to Jackson to take the job at Chastain Middle School, but she left him behind to be cared for by her parents, so she was able to be free to concentrate on her new job. But that also meant she was free to do whatever she pleased with Keon. But here's the shocking part. Back in 2004, Carla was supposed to get married to her fiancé. And she too, just like Avis, was pregnant when they were supposed to exchange their vows. But just days before her wedding, her fiancé called it all off, leaving her to raise her son all alone as a single mother. All of her dreams were shattered. It was a very odd coincidence. If she had killed Avis, was this some type of subconscious revenge for her own life not turning out as she planned? So she wanted to stop this other woman from getting what she couldn't have? I couldn't believe it when I heard it. But the defense tried to prove that Keon was the killer. Johnny brought up the key that Keon had borrowed from Carla, the gunpowder residue on his hands, and his intimate knowledge of what Carla's apartment looked like. But Keon didn't know where Carla kept her cousin's gun. He didn't have the key anymore, and even Carla's extended family was convinced that she was the one that actually killed Avis, as much as they didn't want to believe it was true. Carla's uncle James said that when she returned the gun to him and Patrick, he asked her if she had used the gun to kill anyone, and she dropped her head and shrugged her shoulders. James wasn't sure what that meant. Carla either didn't know what happened or she had killed Avis. She just didn't want to admit it. Starting Monday, October 12th, the jury began their deliberations. They asked if Karla could testify, but she remained silent. After 8 hours of deliberation, Karla was found guilty. When the verdict was read, Deborah became very upset. She even fainted, and she needed to recover in a separate room. Linda, who is Karla's mother, for all intents and purposes, went to her and prayed with her, and Fred and Carl prayed for one another. Both families lost in this tragic crime. Both families were grieving. After 3 long years of seeking justice for Avis's murder, the Banks and the Hughes families were absolutely exhausted. After spending all this time together, they connected by such a horrible event. The two families had formed an acquaintanceship. They bonded by loss. They wanted the best for one another, and they wanted all of this to be over. Karla's sentencing was set for Wednesday the 14th, and Carl pleaded for her life. Her son was now 5 years old, and if Karla was given the death penalty, her child would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of his life. The jury agreed and gave Karla 2 sentences of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole instead of death. Wow, that's a lot. And this case just seems to keep going, but I'm almost done. Johnny will forever be known as the defense lawyer who just doesn't quit. Karla appealed the verdict on 6 different counts for showing DNA evidence, for asking if she wanted to testify, etc., etc. I'm not going to go into all of it because the reality is all of the circumstantial evidence pointed to Karla. She borrowed the gun. She was at the scene of the crime. Her shoes had blood on them. It was Karla, and the appeal was dismissed. She was transferred to the Central Mississippi Women's Correctional Facility, where she's going to spend the rest of her life. I guess we'll never know if Keon had any role in Avis's murder. Sometimes cases are frustrating like that. I still have so many questions about this case, like what were Keon and Karla saying to each other on the phone the 5+ times they called each other that night? Could it have just been a way for Karla to make it look like nothing nefarious was going on? I'm definitely not Keon's biggest fan. I'm appalled by his behavior when it came to all the times he cheated on Avis that we know of. But if he was an accessory in Avis's murder, he's the one that's going to pay for it in guilt and shame for the rest of his life. And if Keon truly had no idea what happened to his fiancée and his unborn child, then my heart goes out to him. Losing someone you love when you have all these plans and your whole life ahead of you is extremely devastating and hard to bounce back from, and I'm very sorry. From what I know and have learned about Avis, she was an absolutely wonderful woman, and I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to continue her legacy by talking about her today. Her passion for affordable daycare, her persistent kindness and generosity, and her commitment to her family. Fred said he pities Keon Pittman, saying that once he had a perfect life with Avis, and he threw it all away and got Avis killed as a result. Avis's family is haunted by a constant wonder what life would have been like for her and her unborn son if they hadn't been brutally murdered. She had so much potential to make a difference in this world. I'll leave you with Deborah and Fred's words after the sentencing. Deborah said that no matter what came out of this case, she knows that Avis will haunt Keon and Karla every night before they go to sleep. And Fred said that now Avis's murderer is behind bars and she could finally rest in peace. I thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you so much for giving your time to Avis's story. I will see you in my next video. Bye.